Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online service for the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. Welcome from the comfort of your homes, from wherever you are and however you are feeling this morning. Welcome into this virtual space. I hope you find a way to get comfortable in your own body, to rest and relax and enter into this time of community and connection. I'm the Reverend Emily D. Tarbert, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm speaking live from my apartment here in Marble Hill, Manhattan. Grateful to be with all of you this morning. I open our Easter service this morning with words from Ian Rydell, The Old, Old Story. We gather today in the presence of the old, old story of death defeated by emptiness, of hope and newness, triumphant over fear and separation. We come, hearts heavy with pain and anxiety, spirits flattened by exhaustion and apathy, visions darkened by strife and violence. We come seeking connection and love in this place of community. May the old, old Easter story of hope and rebirth lighten our hearts and make us glad in the presence of each other's love. May our spirits be joyful as we worship together today. So now I ask you to join me in the words of our chalice lighting. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite in worship and fellowship. And as we have been doing for almost a year now, as an extension of our chalice lighting, I want to take a moment of silence to light these candles for the names of those who've been recently affected by police brutality. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected. We light a candle for the life of George Floyd, the life of Marvin Scott, and for the life of Kurt Reinhold. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and proclaim everywhere that Black lives matter. Now please join us in singing our first hymn, hymn number 266, Now the Green Blade Riseth. Please join along in the words on your screen as I will sing them and lead you in this hymn. Now the green blade riseth from the buried grain, wheat that in the dark earth many days has lain. Love lives again, that with the dead has been. Love is come again like spring, wheat that springeth green. In the grave they laid him, love by hatred slain, thinking that never he would wake again. Laid in the earth like rain that sleeps unseen. Love is come again like wheat that springeth green. When our hearts are wintry, grieving or in pain, love's touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, love is come again like wheat that springeth green. Now, I would like to invite Ruth and then Mike Stein to share our readings this morning. Ruth, share our reading.
The following readings are from the Gospel of Mark, the New Revised Standard Edition. From the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verses 33 through 37. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, listen, he's calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. From the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 6. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him.
A reading by Rebecca Ann Parker. Even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or the failure of others, cutting into our lives, even when we have done all we can, and life is still broken, there is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will.
There is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will. For those of us, or maybe for those who are new, for all who may be part of this community, we call ourselves Unitarian Universalists. Unitarian Universalism is a long name. There are many who wonder why we still have such a long denominational title after all of these years. We've certainly evolved past Unitarian and Universalist roots, yes. Well, for the mouthful that it is, I cherish these words as signs of the heritage that have led us to where we are today. And as I think of this Easter story specifically that we share every year, I look into our faith's past, the radical message of love of our Universalist ancestors. Our Universalist ancestors, the first denomination in the United States who ordained women. Our ancestors who helped on the Underground Railroad, who were circuit riders to common farmers, part of a movement of the great revivals. Ancestors spreading a message of ultimate hope. So today I want to look through the stories of Easter with the eyes of Universalists past and present to see what wisdom can be inspired from this holiday. A little bit of history. Universalists, at least in the American context, emerged in response to rising Puritan movements across England and America. Speakers of the 18th and 19th century who spoke, like Jonathan Edwards very infamously, about sinners in the hands of an angry God. Movements that spoke of hell and eternal hellfire. Well, for Universalists like Hosea Ballou at the time, hell made absolutely no sense. Why? Why would an all-loving God ever condemn anyone to hell? Just didn't make any sense. So instead, Universalists preached about a God that had no hell, that wanted everyone not only to be loved, but to have happiness, to have wholeness. A God who rejoiced in life and not in punishment or death. These are our Universalist ancestors. Which leads me to this story of Easter and the ways that it gets understood throughout the centuries. Throughout the centuries, there are many different aspects of Christian theologies that have turned into many different denominations throughout time. And one part of this story, certain theologies focus on one of the chapters we read over the other. When Jesus asks anguishedly, why have you forsaken me? Some theologians wanted to answer that why. And they believed that this kind of suffering was planned and purposeful. And from there sprung centuries of theologies of atonement, promoting self-sacrifice and martyrdom as holy or sacred. Certain theologies of atonement over time have been warped. They've been used in ways to punish people, to create excuses for victims of violence, and to perpetuate trauma. Universalist Unitarian Rebecca Ann Parker co-wrote a book called Saving Paradise: How Christianity Traded Love of This World for Crucifixion and Empire. In this book, she explores her curiosity for how and why did Christianity transition from a focus on paradise towards a focus on crucifixion. As she says in her UU World article about the book, her question is, quote, what led Western Christianity to replace resurrection with crucifixion-centered salvation, and to relegate paradise to a distant afterlife? Quote, in short, the needs of the empire and theologies that justified and sanctified violence and war transformed Christianity and alienated Western Christians from a world they once perceived was a paradise. End quote. In short, systems of institutions, people in power, structures of oppression over the years have focused on a theology of atonement to perpetuate and explain why suffering is necessary, why violence is necessary. But Universalists, like Rebecca Ann Parker herself, ask a different question of this Easter story. They don't focus on the why Jesus died, because the story actually already tells us. To think that this suffering was the blame of God is to make God a holy, or what is holy, malicious, vindictive, punishing. It removes the history and the reality that led to this story. It was the Roman Empire who decided Jesus was going to die. It was Pontius Pilate who decided to save his own political prestige and power, even though he openly admitted he did not see how this criminal was guilty. It was a system and an empire that decided that this brown immigrant life was a threat. It was the combined forces of poverty, of politics, of religious institutions, of power that left this lowly, forgettable, brown-skinned man to die on the side of the road. That's why. Systems of injustice are why. But for Universalists, the power of the story is not in that section. It's in what happens next. The miracle and message rest 3 days later. You see, it is the person who was deemed forsaken, the person who was said that they were the threat, that they should be forgettable, that they should die. That is the person that lives again. That is the person who comes back. The resurrection, whether taken literal or metaphorical, is a story that says, no, you are not forsaken. Your life matters. That there is no force of greed, of institution or injustice, of political power or poverty. There is no force that has the final word. There is something that no one can kill. And that is the power of love. There are so many forces in our world today that try to convince particular people that they are forsaken, that they should be forgettable, that they don't matter. And I especially think of that when I look over this past year. We've not really had this global human experience of feeling isolation, of feeling disconnected and traumatized. So much death and grief. And yet in this global experience, we've seen laid plain systems of injustice, the intersections of oppression. It is so easy to feel powerless. It is easy to feel like this is it. That there has to be a reason for all of this suffering. But this is not the end of the story. I cannot help but think of the correlations between this Good Friday and Easter story and the recent trials for the murder of George Floyd. There are systems in our world that deem Black lives as less than, as forsaken. And no, I do not know what this trial will bring about. I do not know what justice can even look like at this time. But I do know this. It was George Floyd's name that brought millions of people around the world to the streets in May. It is George Floyd's name that will not be forgotten. It is that name that lives on, a legacy of love that we live out in the world. Death did not win. Death does not win. Love and life do. And we get to choose how we focus on the power of love and life hereout. If what we have seen in this last year of the movement of Black Lives Matter, if that is not resurrection, I don't know what is. For Universalists, in our past and present, we don't focus on a power of suffering. We choose to focus on the power of love, of relationship and connection. Universalists ask the question, what actually saves us? It's not hell or punishment. It's not judgment or pain or martyrdom or suffering or violence. What can be named as holy and meaningful is nothing more or less than compassion, mercy, justice, and love. It is found in relationship, in connection. And impossible things can happen with love. It can pull people from their despair. It can reconnect the broken. It can heal the trauma of the past and forge new ways of living. It can bring new life even to the names of the dead. For our Universalist ancestors, it was love and love alone that had the power to bring back the dead in memory, in story, and life. At memorial services, you may often hear me use a phrase that I've actually been given permission to adapt by Reverend Lissa Gunlock. That people live on and we carry out their legacy of love. You may have heard me say that. This is the sentiment of my connection with our Universalist heritage. It's a nod that there is something beyond an individual life, something beyond any individual story, towards the power of our collective humanity. That we sit together in the presence and mystery of a connection far greater than can be imagined, a love so much greater than we can comprehend. So when we look around our world and we see the intersections of those who are deemed matter less, when we see people who are at their wits' end, or when you feel forsaken, when you feel forgotten or denied or isolated or despairing, remember, you are loved. You are loved beyond belief. You have inherent worth that nothing and no one can kill. There is a love that you cannot buy, you cannot purchase, you cannot earn it. It simply is. It is how we breathe. It's what we are as human beings. It's how we become. Death and despair do not have the final word. The story is not over. For the dawn will come, and we choose how we participate in the love that will always have the final word. May it be so, and amen. It is at this time in our service where we ask for an offertory for our congregation. One moment, please. As an offertory, we know it is the gifts that you give us that help us sustain our community. But more than that, it is your pledges that help us budget, that help us make sure that we maintain our operating funds, that keep the lights on, that pay our staff. So please, if you can, if you're willing and able, we will soon be launching into a stewardship season where you'll be getting a question to renew your pledge. Please fulfill and renew your pledge if you can. We need your generosity to keep this church and its mission alive. We thank you so much for all the ways that you give to our community. Here is our offertory from Leah Morris this morning, given with permission.
We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sky, it tells us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as the children raise all their faces to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the seas, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as the flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love.
Now, please join us for our closing hymn this morning. Now, let us sing. You'll see the hymn lyrics on your screen. Give us a moment to get there. Some instructions for you. You'll see that it only has one version of the lyrics. Now, let us sing to the power of faith. Every verse, it's going to change that word. So it goes faith, hope, love, and joy. Sing to the power of faith, sing to the power of hope, sing to the power of love, sing to the power of joy. Okay? I'm going to share with you our lyrics.
We are
Sing to the power of the faith within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within. Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the hope within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the love within. Sing to the power of the love within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the love within. Sing to the power of the joy within. Sing to the power of the joy within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the joy within. Thank you all. I now invite Ruth to extinguish our chalice this morning.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
There is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will. May we choose to focus on the part of the story that calls us towards love, to live out and be that universal love in the world, always remembering no human being is ever forsaken, for love will always have the final word. May it be so.